Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to take one question and kind of break it up into parts. There are kind of multiple questions within the one question here. And it comes to us from John 2001 Plus, who asked, "Hey Thor, if Leslie Headland hadn't made controversial comments before the Acolyte aired, do you think you or others would have interpreted the show's motives as negatively? I tried to ignore her statements and judge the show purely based on what was on screen. I even considered the possibility that her remarks had been taken out of context." And I'll pause there and respond to that part and say that personally, I don't think it had much of anything to do with my interpretation of the show or how much I enjoyed it, speaking of my opinion of Leslie Headland or anything she had said. Now, I certainly think there are others who were impacted by either the things she said or the fact that, yes, she was a personal assistant of Harvey Weinstein, who did some very bad things. You can go look him up yourself if you don't know. And certainly that influenced people's opinions of the show going into it. There is no denying the fact that a lot of people gave the show negative reviews before it came out, that it was review bombed based solely off of, or not solely, but in large part, again, based off of her past associations, along with some of the things she had said. At one point, I did make a video about some of her comments towards George Lucas, where she said something to the effect that he gets too much credit for Star Wars. And I'm taking this out of context now, so you can look up the video if you want and see the full context of everything and what she said, because what I did was kind of take her comments and put them back into the greater context, because the clip that was going around had been edited a bit. It had a middle portion chopped out of it, and I kind of examined the whole thing and came to the conclusion that what she said was kind of poorly worded, but not entirely wrong. I mean, if you don't have George Lucas, you don't have Star Wars to begin with. You don't have that first idea. You don't have the genesis of it all. But yes, there are a ton of people who deserve some degree of credit, maybe a large degree of credit for the success of Star Wars. Everybody from, of course, the actors, to those behind the scenes, to John Williams, who did the incredible score, who really gave it a grandiose feeling to go along with the incredible special effects at the time. So again, there are a ton of people who deserve credit. I agree with her, but again, the way she kind of worded it made it seem like, well, it was just his little idea and everybody else had a bigger part to play, and I would disagree with that. So no, her comments beforehand didn't really influence my opinion of what the show ultimately was beforehand. I really, especially considering just how much, again, there was negativity around the show going into it, I really told myself I was going to be as fair as I possibly could to this one, that I would give it a chance, and if I liked it, I would say as much, despite the fact that if I did, I knew there were a lot of people out there who were going to be unhappy that I liked this show, considering they had made their minds up beforehand. But it turned out that it wasn't a very good show. Alright, let's get back to the comment now, and it continues. "I ask because it seems we interpret the show in very different ways. You appear to see it as either hostile to the Jedi or endorsing the gray philosophy. For me, the parts I enjoyed had nothing to do with superficial aspects of Star Wars, nor with hatred of the Jedi, nor with an endorsement of the gray philosophy. As you've pointed out, a story can be told from the perspective of the villains, and it can also explore Jedi who have lost their way. I saw this as a show told from the perspective of the bad guys with some well-intended Jedi who had faltered. A story from the villain's point of view is not necessarily an endorsement of evil, just as The Sopranos is not an endorsement of crime." And I agree with you, there are plenty of books in Star Wars, such as the Plagueis novel or the Bane trilogy, where it is definitely told from the perspective of the bad guys, and they are not an endorsement of evil. In fact, they are very much not an endorsement of evil. The Plagueis novel doesn't make me have any sympathy for either Plagueis or Palpatine. What it does is give you the perspective of evil. It makes you see that there are certain individuals out there who will do anything and everything for power, and they will murder and cheat and lie and steal and feel no remorse for it. And at no point in, say, again, the Plagueis novel, do they really make any sort of case against the Jedi beyond the fact that, yeah, the Sith don't like the Jedi for their own reasons, and I can appreciate that. I can appreciate why Palpatine or Plagueis do not like the Jedi. And what's different in The Acolyte is it feels like there is, again, this idea that the Jedi are the ones responsible for the rise of evil, that it is Vanestra Row's fault that the Stranger or Khmer has gone to the dark side because she whipped him with her lightsaber whip for reasons we may have discovered later on. Or that May fell to the dark side because Sol tried to save her sister or had to pick between the two, and then he lied to Osha about it, and now she falls to the dark side too, and it's just all his fault. And then you've got poor Torben, who felt so guilty about everything that he unalives himself, as we have to say here on YouTube. And so instead of it being a clever story about bad people who view the world differently, and we can understand that that is a different view and it is a wrong view, it kind of makes this case that the Jedi were so bad and so flawed that we came about, or the Sith or the bad guys came about or fell because of them. And sure, if you're very clever, I think you could do a story like that. I think the prequels, for example, kind of skirt that line. There are some who watch the prequels and go, Anakin fell because of the Jedi, or others who say Anakin fell because of himself, because of his choices. And I don't think you're entirely wrong if you say Anakin fell because of the Jedi. There were certainly things they could have done that eased his mind or helped him more than they did. But in all reality, as I always say, Star Wars is about choices. It is about the choices made by the characters and the repercussions that come from them. And Anakin had his chances, he had his choices, and he made the wrong ones. That doesn't mean the Jedi are completely blameless in that situation. You can have nuance there. You can have a debate about who is to blame. But in all reality, Anakin was the one who made the choices he did. He is the one to blame. And the Acolyte feels like the opposite to that. It feels like these characters, the dark side characters, the Oshas, the Strangers, they had no choice but to fall because of the actions of the Jedi. Alright, and on to the final part of his question here. I thought the series had potential. I was invested in Osha's story and found her character engaging rather than boring. Early on, I wanted to see where the show was going, and I even thought it had a chance to redeem itself in a second season. Ultimately, I believe the show failed due to poor execution, especially in the later episodes, rather than because of its motives or point of view. Best wishes, John Coffey. And I agree, I thought the series had potential. I thought the idea was a solid one. I didn't hate the idea at all. Again, I don't hate the idea of having a show that gives the Sith's perspective, as long as they do it in a way that doesn't necessarily have to throw the Jedi under the bus. Again, you can have nuance, but to me, from my point of view, it seemed like Hedlund had an axe to grind with the Jedi. It seemed like she really wanted to make this point that, you know what, sometimes good people make bad decisions and it leads to bad outcomes. Not that she would ever feel any guilt about anything like that, right? But that's kind of what I felt was the point or intent of the show, to explain away the Sith and why they become dark side and evil. And certainly you can argue that in general there is a reason why people become bad. Now, sometimes it might be just bad wiring in the head, if you will. Sometimes it is a result of the life that they lead or what people have done to them. I'm not saying we can't have a tragic story about a Sith who has done wrong and falls to the dark side because everybody who was supposed to love him and care for him, like his family, betrayed him and did all these horrible things. You could certainly tell that story. But again, here I feel like it is the Jedi who are being pointed at as responsible for the fall of these characters, and I don't necessarily think that is a great story to tell in Star Wars. You can certainly question the Jedi, but when you really kind of make them out to be the bad guys of the show, I don't think that fits very well. That's a personal opinion. You can disagree, certainly, but I don't think that goes along with what the intent was for the creation of Star Wars in the first place by George Lucas. It's really supposed to be an inspiring tale for younger people. It is supposed to promote spirituality and being a better person and being more selfless and all those sorts of things I always talk about. Though that said, I also do agree what ultimately damned the show, why it is a bad show in my opinion, is not necessarily even because of that. Because I could still, if it had been a good show, I could still find it within me to step back and look at it and say, you know what, I don't agree with the points it's making, but it is at least well written. It makes a point about something that I don't necessarily think maybe should be made in Star Wars, but I would have acknowledged it was good. I mean, I recently went back and watched The Last Jedi. I talked about it, and though I don't think it is a great movie, and I think it is a horrible Star Wars movie, I can say, you know what, I get what he was going for. It has its moments. It does have a theme. I can understand the message. I just don't think it is very well executed there either, but it's not the worst movie I have ever seen. Whereas if this wasn't Star Wars, or if The Acolyte wasn't Star Wars, if I didn't care about Jedi and Sith and all of that, I would still think this is a very poorly told story, and that character motivations are kind of all over the place, and that it really feels like it wants to make a point against the good guys in favor of the bad guys. But anyway, I think that is going to be all I got for you this time. I just want to say thanks to John, because I don't mean to sound like I'm trying to be confrontational or argue against you. I'm just giving you what I honestly think about the show. I get that you liked certain aspects of it, and that is 100% fine. But for me, again, it felt like a show that kind of had an axe to grind against the Jedi, and that really just wasn't very well made. But anyway, if you want to ask a question for a future lightning response video, you can just take to the comments below, say hey Thor, ask your question, and I'll try to get to it in a future video. But whatever the case may be, leave those comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.